Ruth Weiss is an internationally famous poet, artist, actress, and filmmaker. She was born in Berlin, and in 1938, her news editor father and her mother and she fled Nazi Germany to arrive in the United States. They moved around and finally found a stable home in Chicago. When Ruth was a girl, she wrote a poem about how America saved her life, and she sent it to President Roosevelt, and in return received a heartfelt response. At a young age, the already lyrical and rebellious Ruth changed the spelling of her name from Ruth Weiss to lowercase Ruth Weiss as a protest of the law and order ethos of her birthplace in Germany, where nouns are capitalized. And you'll see it both ways in writing, but for this presentation, when I put in quotes or whatnot, it's how the person who wrote it did it. Ruth may not have invented what came to be known as jazz poetry, but she is credited with introducing it to San Francisco. What happened was one night a friend grabbed a page of her work out of her typewriter and dashed upstairs where a jazz trio was jamming to poetry and at a party. And Ruth gave chase, but it was too late. She was talked into reading her work, and as she did, a bassist started laying down a beat, added to by a pianist, and in that moment was born the marriage of two distinctive art forms. Like many post-war poets, Ruth did most of her typing in a basement apartment, and it was painted all black, and it was lit only by a bare blue light bulb. And now we're going to watch a trailer about a movie for Ruth Weiss. Unfortunately, I could not find anywhere on the internet to watch this movie. Ruth Weiss was born in 1928, and like I said, she passed away July 31st of 2020, and she was actively writing and performing poetry right up until her death. This is Nomi Stone, and I learned about Nomi Stone when I just Googled female Jewish poets. And as with all of the poets that I'm featuring here today, I did take out many of her books from the library and read through them. I had a very difficult time finding any personal biographical information, which I found to be quite interesting. She was asked a question in an interview whether she was a poet first or an anthropologist. And her answer was that she was a poet first. I had been writing poems since I was 6 years old. The old adage tells us to write what we know. I wanted to enlarge my knowing. I wanted to unmoor my mechanisms of seeing, my ethnographic pursuits, and my choice to become an anthropologist are my ultimate offering to my poems as well as to my life. She went to Djerba, which is in Tunisia, and as a poet on a Fulbright scholarship. And it was there where she decided that maybe she could become an anthropologist to really strengthen and broaden her work. Her first collection was about her work in Djerba, and she lived side by side with Jewish families and Muslim families. And the legend is that the Jews of Tunisia in 586 BC carried a single stone from the destroyed temple in Jerusalem. And this stone kept coming back to her in her work. She kept seeing blood, bombs, stones, keys, blue, and this is what she wrote about. So it's really very fascinating. And today, the Jewish population of Djerba is estimated to be less than 1,500 people. So this was her first book about that experience called Stranger's Notebook. Her second book is called Kill Class, and this takes place in Pineland, which is a military training center here in the United States in North Carolina. And it's actually a mock country where American soldiers engage in war games. In Pineland, Stone writes in one of the many prose poems that sets the scene and offers context between first-person lyrics. At one time, Pineland was looking like a Soviet village, and now it looks like a Middle Eastern village. She spent 2 years embedding, like an embedded poet, if you will, which I find quite fascinating because we talk about a lot of embedded journalists, where she lived and worked and ate and tried everything right alongside these soldiers that were training for war in the Middle East. And her poetic project aligns with the documentary poetic movement, which is also really hot right now in the United States. So I'm going to have her read a poem from her book, Kill Class. It's called The Soldier Takes the Anthropologist to the Shooting Range. And this is an audio clip. So this book has been called a tough balance to strike, and one that calls into question the kinds of truth-telling to which poetry is suited. And I know there's a lot of poets with us today, and there's a lot of talk about how poetry is documenting what's happening in the world as we see it right now, and it is a truth-telling practice. So we'll move on to the next poet, who is Frederick Seidel. Here's a quote from a book review that I saw in the Denver Post in March about Frederick Seidel. It's originally from the New York Times. The way to read Frederick Seidel's selected poems is to remove the dust jacket, light a match, and torch it. It's not that the jacket is unattractive, but the hardcover underneath it is ink black. Once the jacket's gone, you have what each of Seidel's poems aspire to be, a little black book. And I was reading this book review, and immediately when I heard the name Frederick Seidel, I thought to myself, I bet he's Jewish. And so of course I looked him up, and now he's included here. He was born to a very wealthy family in St. Louis and had a Harvard education, and sort of paraded as a Northeast highfalutin sort of educated person, not like from the humble sort of roots that he had in St. Louis. In 1962, he was awarded, his first collection, Final Solutions, which was in 1962, caused quite a controversy. It was chosen by a jury at the 92nd Street Y in New York City for an award of $1,500 and publication by the Athenaeum Press. But the Y rejected the manuscript, claiming that one of the poems libeled a famous living person, and Seidel was unwilling to make the edits necessary to move it forward in publication. And it did eventually get published by Random House, and then he did not publish another book for 17 years. He has over 9 collections of poetry, though, that he has published. And he was controversial throughout his entire poetic career. He was not only considered anti-Catholic, at times he was also considered anti-Semitic. And I've read a lot of his work to prepare for this presentation, and I did decide to include him because he is lauded by his peers. And I just also want to mention that when that award happened for him in 1962, the 92nd Street Y in New York City was a YMYWHA. And so here is what's said about him today. Frederick Seidel has been called the poet the 20th century deserved, and lauded as one of the best poets writing today. He has also been accused of writing sinister and disturbing poetry. That's my personal favorite kind of poetry. In the New York Times, David Orr compared Seidel to a violinist who pauses from bowing expertly through Paganini's Caprice No. 24 to smash his instrument against the wall. Such a combination of barbarity and grace is one of Seidel's most remarkable technical achievements. And his admirers contend that his poems are sophisticated masks, each subtly altering a poetic performance of Frederick Seidel in the manner of the confessional poets, who would include like Allen Ginsberg and Sylvia Plath. However, Frederick Seidel says of himself, everything in the poems is true, you should take them at face value. And Gabriel's going to play a clip now of Mr. Seidel reading his poem, Avalanche. And the reason I chose this poem was twofold. One, because we've had an almost record-breaking year of avalanches in the Mountain West this winter, so it seems timely. And also because he compares an avalanche to growing older. So there was a question in the chat if I knew who Frederick Seidel libeled, and It was Cardinal Spellman in the 1960s in New York that he libeled, and that's why he got the anti-Catholic reputation. Our next poet is Joy Ladin. Joy has written more than 9 books of poetry, memoir, trans theology, and dissertation. And in clip number 5, which Gabriel will play for us, she will introduce herself. I learned about Joy and her poetry on Holocaust Remembrance Day back in January. I attended via Zoom an event that was presented by Hillel of Florida International University. Joy mixes modern day inspirations such as Cosmopolitan magazine, text from Cosmopolitan magazine with ancient texts. In her book of Isaiah, she does that to create poetry that is both fresh and unique. And next we'll listen to a poem by Joy from Shekinah Speaks, a work that is still in progress for her. It is called Comfort Animal, and this is where she does mix language from a Cosmopolitan magazine with the book of Isaiah, and it's clip number 6. Joy is the author of 9 poetry collections. She is a professor at Yeshiva University. She has a MFA and a PhD. She's really a scholarly poet. She was a finalist for the 2009 Lambda Literary Award. She has twice been honored with Forward 5 awards and has received an American Council of Learned Societies Fellowship and a Fulbright Scholarship. She's a nationally recognized speaker on gender and Jewish identity. Joy has spoken around the country and has been featured on a number of NPR programs, including On Being with Krista Tippett, which is a fabulous podcast if you've not listened to it. And On Being also has an offshoot podcast called Poetry Unbound by Padraig Otuma, which is also really, really worth listening to. And now we're going to watch a short film that's written and narrated by Joy. Our next poet is this very handsome young man, Aaron Samuels. I'm a Jewish mother of 2 girls. Either one of my girls could bring him home, I'd be happy. Aaron Samuels is redefining what it is to examine Jewish identity. Samuels is a critically acclaimed writer, speaker, and entrepreneur. He worked at Bain & Company for 3 years as a strategy consultant, and he left his Wall Street life to pursue his passion as a writer and builder of community. Since leaving Bain, Aaron has written a book of poetry, toured the country, performed on television, and landed himself on the Forbes prestigious 30 Under 30 list as a rising star in the tech and media space. He is the co-founder and chief operating officer of Blavity, a digital community for Black millennials with over 1 million website views per month. When he's not at Blavity, Aaron is a nationally touring poet and performer. His debut collection of poetry, Yarmulkes and Fitted Caps, was released in 2013. Aaron Samuels is both Black and Jewish. This is his book, and here's a quote from a review. What's most exciting to me about Yarmulkes and Fitted Caps is the strength of its counter-narrative. It documents in beautiful and powerful verse Samuel's navigation of his socially constructed identity and his personal experience of self as they mutually evolve from his childhood into his future. He writes his Judaism, his Blackness, his masculinity, his sexuality. And I will present next, in his own words, clip number 8, Aaron Levi Samuels. Wasn't that fantastic? Just a very moving piece. I really enjoyed learning about Aaron. And we're going to move on to our last poet. Our last poet is Stacy Zusic Robinson. She's a published poet who gave workshops at synagogues across the country and was deeply involved in the musical life of her home congregation in Glencoe, Illinois. She was the author of 3 poetry books, all published in just the past 6 years. And the most recent is the one in the middle, In the Beginning, A Poet's View of Genesis, which was published in September of 2020. Writer and poet Stacy Zusic Robinson passed away on Monday, which was in March of this year, at the age of 59 from COVID. She was a gifted and evocative writer who wrote deeply moving Jewish poetry, and in recent years, she was working on fulfilling her childhood dream of becoming a rabbi. So I tried today to have all of the poets speak in their own voices rather than me recite their poetry. I never would have done it justice as they did in telling their own stories. But I could not find anything with Stacy Zusic Robinson speaking her own poetry. I did, however, find a clip from Rabbi Menachem Creditor, and he is speaking of Stacy as his friend. Rabbi Creditor is the founder of Rabbis Against Gun Violence and is the scholar in residence for the United Jewish Appeal. Some of the friends Robinson made at Jewish gatherings wound up becoming collaborators. Robinson would send her poetry to musicians she befriended and would ask, "Do you think it sings?" And some of these people would turn her poetry into music. Chava Morel is a Seattle-based singer-songwriter who met Robinson at a 2016 conference, and shortly after she got a message about wanting to collaborate. Robinson sent her the words for what would become Chava Morel's most popular song, Come. This song is based on the Baruch prayer, and it was performed at the 2019 Union for Reform Judaism Biennial. And this is our last clip of the day, and sort of how I am as a person, and also I believe in our religion. We should always end with something joyous, and I hope this song is uplifting for you. And in this song, I chose this particular version. There's literally dozens of versions of this song out there. This is Chava Morel with Shimon Smith. He sings in Hebrew and she sings in English, and I really like this version, so enjoy. What a beautiful song. So this is just a real short recap. Today we learned about Ruth Stone, who is the beat goddess, Nomi Stone, Ruth Weiss, I'm sorry, beat goddess, Nomi Stone, who's an anthropologist, Frederick Seidel, who is controversial, Joy Ladin, an esteemed scholar, Aaron Levi Samuels, the founder of Blavity, and Stacy Zusic Robinson, who was studying later in her life to become a rabbi. And then our next slide, Gabriel, is a quote by Leonard Cohen. "Poetry is just the evidence of life. If your life is burning well, poetry is just the ash." And there's one more slide that you can read for yourself.